I didn't bring her into this world, but I held her in my arms before she even knew how to say her own name. My name isn't on her birth certificate, but on every cold night it was me who tucked her in beneath the blankets. I'm not her biological father, but I've spent my whole life doing what a father is meant to do. And today, on the day she graduates from university, in front of hundreds of people, she says she never had a father. I sat in the last row. No one knew who I was. No one called my name. Not a single glance looked my way. Not a single word of thanks. But then, just a moment later, the entire auditorium had to rise to their feet, because what they didn't know was this. The forgotten man sitting in the shadows was the very one who built the future they were all standing in. Don't look away. The early morning light slipped through the crack in the door, casting a gentle glow on the misted bathroom mirror inside a modest bedroom. Mr. Walter Jennings, a black man in his early 60s, stood before the mirror, slowly adjusting the collar of his white shirt. The shirt was carefully pressed, crisp but frayed at the edges. Hanging on the wall was a brownish-grey suit. Old, but clean. Neat. Formal. He slowly slipped into the suit, the same one he wore the day he married Savannah's mother. A moment that felt like it belonged to another lifetime. But this morning, he hoped to wear it for a different reason. He turned toward the bed and picked up a small wooden box resting on a folded white cloth. Inside was a pen engraved with the words, "To Savannah, on your graduation day, with love, Dad." He looked at the inscription longer than usual, then let out a quiet breath, as if releasing some hidden weight he'd been carrying. On the table nearby sat a cup of black coffee, unsweetened. He took a small sip, then tucked the box into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. In the hush of morning light, he stepped toward a photo frame on the vanity. A picture of himself, Savannah's mother, and a little girl at about 6 years old, laughing wildly while perched on his shoulders. He placed a hand gently on the photo. His voice was low, gravelly. "You've gone farther than I ever dreamed, sweetheart. Today you'll graduate, and I'll be there." No one responded. The room was silent. But in his eyes there was something tender and trembling. As he stepped out the door, he bent down to retrieve a pair of polished black shoes, buffed carefully the night before. They too were worn, the soles thinned out, but the laces were neatly tied. He took a deep breath and closed the door quietly, as if afraid to wake someone. The old pickup truck rumbled to life after a few hesitant seconds. And just like that, Walter Jennings drove off, toward one of the most important days of his life. A day he was never invited to. In a kitchen bathed in warm morning sunlight, Savannah Brooks, a tall, blonde, 22-year-old young woman, stood adjusting her graduation cap in the mirror. A black gown draped over her shoulders, and on her feet were gleaming brand-new high heels. At the dining table, her mother, Elaine, was setting out a simple breakfast. She glanced at the clock. Walter's already dressed. He's wearing his suit. Savannah shot her mother a quick look. Her smile was still present, but her eyes betrayed clear discomfort. She smoothed the folds of her gown and spoke softly but firmly. "Mom, I don't want him to come." Elaine froze. Her hand, mid-pour with the orange juice, stopped in the air. "What did you just say?" Savannah turned around, her face now serious. "You know exactly what I mean. He doesn't fit. I don't want my friends to see him. Not today. Not in front of the faculty, the deans. This is my big day." Elaine tightened her grip on the glass but kept her voice calm. "He's been by your side for 18 years, Savannah. He's not my father, and we both know that." At that moment, from the hallway just outside, Walter Jennings was walking slowly, holding his suit jacket fresh off the hanger. Hearing the voices, he stopped. He didn't step in. He didn't speak. He simply stood behind the wall separating the kitchen from the hallway and heard everything. Every word landed like a blade. Back in the kitchen, Savannah added, this time with no effort to soften her tone, "If he shows up, I won't give my speech. Don't blame me for that. This is my future, and he doesn't belong in it." Elaine stood frozen, but before she could respond, Savannah grabbed her purse, placed her cap on her head, and strode toward the front door. She passed by Walter without so much as a glance, leaving behind only a cold sentence, "I'll call a private ride, no need for you to take me." The door closed. The house fell into an eerie silence. Elaine stood in the kitchen, eyes glistening with tears, and Walter still stood in the hallway. He didn't say a word, just clenched his hand for a moment, then let it go. He turned back slowly and walked into his room, straightened his tie, buttoned his jacket, and picked up the small wooden gift box. "I'm still coming, Savannah, but I'll sit where you'll be most comfortable," he whispered quietly to himself. Westport University's campus was in full splendor that day. Elegant white tents lined the lawn, silver-blue flags fluttered in the breeze, and classical music echoed from the university orchestra. Rows of guest seating stretched toward the main stage, completely filled. Parents dressed in designer suits, cocktail dresses, and luxury sunglasses laughed and posed for photos with their children. Graduating students exchanged excited whispers, reading over speech notes. News crews quietly filmed every moment. Amid the flow of late arrivals, Walter Jennings appeared, walking slowly, his head held high, eyes scanning the crowd with careful focus. In his hand, he still held the small wooden box. The suit he wore stood out, not for its value, but because it was unmistakably outdated, ill-suited for an event like this. A young usher approached him briskly. "Excuse me, sir, do you have a VIP ticket?" Walter smiled politely, shaking his head. "Number, I'm just here to watch someone graduate." The young man glanced around, then pointed toward the far end of the field. "Then please head to the auxiliary seating in the back, over there, near the catering tent, by the side gate." Walter nodded, without the slightest complaint. He walked past the main rows, where the chatter buzzed like champagne. As he passed, a few people turned to look. A middle-aged man whispered to his wife, "Looks like one of the security guards, doesn't he?" An older woman nearby frowned as Walter approached. "Are you sure you're in the right place? These seats are for student families." Walter simply smiled. "I know, I am family, just not the kind people usually talk about." He sat down in the very last row. So far from the stage, you had to squint to make out the students' faces. His chair was part of a plastic overflow section, just behind the food station for the event staff. The sun had risen high, its rays sharp and hot. Walter loosened his collar slightly, pulled out a handkerchief to dab his forehead, then took the small wooden box from his jacket and placed it gently on his lap. Sitting there, surrounded by indifferent stares, bursts of laughter, the scent of expensive perfume, and the clink of wine glasses, he was like a shadow no one saw, a man with no name, no invitation, no mention in the program, but the man who was about to change the entire ceremony in a way no one ever expected. A trumpet rang out with stately flair. A female graduate, dressed in a flowing black gown, was called over the loudspeaker with resounding clarity. "Savannah Elaine Brooks, Bachelor of Public Policy, magna cum laude." The entire arena erupted in applause. From the front rows came cheers, whistles, and admiring remarks like, "She's incredible. That single mom raised her daughter so well." Savannah walked across the stage, her steps light as air. Her face was radiant, her eyes glowing with pride and a sense of liberation. She bowed slightly to receive her diploma, shook the dean's hand, and turned to smile for the official graduation photo. Her mother, Elaine, sat in the third row, eyes brimming with tears, clapping non-stop. All the way in the last row, under the blazing sun, Walter Jennings squinted toward the stage. The little girl who once rode on his shoulders, sounding out words from picture books, now stood under lights celebrated by hundreds. But not a single spotlight reached him. He clapped, gently, with hands calloused from knocking on countless machine shop doors to find work when Savannah was small. Fingers that once patched a leaking roof, built her study desk, and filled gas tanks on snowy nights, now quietly laced together in silence. No one turned to look. No one asked who he was. The girl on stage was showered in praise, and he was just a black man in a worn suit, sitting in the lengthening shadows behind the catering tent. A student volunteer passed by and leaned in. "Sir, would you like some water? Once everyone's seated, I can bring you a chair with a backrest, okay?" Walter simply shook his head and smiled. For 18 years, he'd never asked for a place of honor. But somewhere deep inside, a quiet part of him had hoped, just once, to see Savannah's eyes searching for him in the crowd. But it never happened. Because today she walked across that stage, as if he had never existed. The MC stepped onto the stage, voice brimming with energy as it echoed through the microphone. And now, a special address from our outstanding graduate, who just received her magna cum laude degree, Savannah Brooks. The audience erupted in thunderous applause. Savannah stepped to the center of the stage, her hair catching the breeze, golden sunlight casting a proud, commanding glow on her face. She looked down at the crowd, and her eyes found the third row where her mother sat. They locked eyes. A faint smile passed between them. From far in the back, Walter Jennings watched her too, his gaze soft but tinged with sorrow. He was still hoping for a word, a nod, a glance, just one moment, and it would be enough. Savannah took the microphone. Her voice rang out, clear and strong. "Today, I didn't just receive a diploma. I walked out of the past, out of the limits, out of everything that made me doubt myself during childhood. And the one who made that possible is my mother." The crowd began nodding, smiling. She continued, lifting her chin with pride. "My mother is the strongest woman I've ever known. She didn't need anyone by her side. She was both mother and father. She stood alone against the world, just so I could be here today." Walter's eyes never left her, but now a subtle fracture had begun to appear behind his gaze. Savannah paused, then spoke slowly, deliberately, making sure every word landed. "I don't have a father, and I've never needed one." The entire auditorium fell silent. A few people clapped, hesitantly, but many just glanced around, confused, unsure if they'd heard correctly. Walter didn't react. He simply froze, as if someone had suddenly pulled all the air from his lungs. That sentence, so simple, so short, cut through all 18 years he had spent quietly being her father. No shouting, no insults, just one sentence, and he was erased from her life. Completely. He bowed his head. Gently, just enough for the sunlight on his brow to slip away. The stage's shadow now stretched across his shoulders, heavier, darker. No one called his name, no one sat beside him. Only the small wooden box in his jacket pocket remained, now resting like a gift no one wanted to receive. The ceremony went on. More names were called, but the energy in the air had dimmed. Some guests still looked puzzled after Savannah's speech, but all chose to remain silent. In the very back row, near the catering tent and the side gate, Walter Jennings still sat, alone on a faded white plastic chair that had long lost its shine under the sun. The sunlight now beat down harder on his shoulder, but he didn't move. The small wooden box was no longer in his pocket. It now rested on his lap, his hands gently laid over it, as if afraid it might disappear. A group of student volunteers pushed a cart of bottled water past the back row. A brown-haired boy leaned in and whispered, "Hey, who's that guy sitting way back there? Doesn't look like family of any graduate." The girl beside him wrinkled her nose and muttered, "Looks like some retired janitor or maybe a groundskeeper not in uniform." They chuckled softly. Walter didn't turn around, but he heard it all, not because his hearing was especially sharp, but because he was used to this kind of silence, the kind that cuts deeper than a shout. A young woman wearing a volunteer badge approached him hesitantly, bowed politely but awkwardly. "Excuse me, sir. I'm not sure if any family members were assigned to sit in this section. These seats are usually for backstage staff or tech crew." Walter looked up, no anger, no protest. He simply looked at the girl with kind, tired eyes and replied, "I'm not in the wrong place, sweetheart. I'm exactly where they believe I belong." The student froze for a moment, unsure how to respond, then quietly walked away. From the front, near the VIP rows, Savannah glanced over her shoulder. And for a fleeting second, her eyes found Walter sitting alone among the forgotten chairs. They made eye contact, just for a moment, but Savannah turned away. No nod, no smile, no gesture. She rejected him, with the kind of indifference that breaks a man's heart, without saying a single word. The ceremony seemed to be drawing to a close. The university president, Mr. James Halberd, a silver-haired gentleman, stepped up to the podium once more, prepared to deliver the closing remarks. He tapped the microphone gently, his warm baritone rising above the murmurs beginning to ripple through the lower rows. "Before we all leave today, I ask you to stay. Just 1 minute longer." The crowd, some already halfway out of their seats, paused. A few students mid-signature froze with pens hovering over guest books. The media team shifted their camera angles back toward the stage. Walter Jennings still sat in his seat, far in the back. His eyes squinted slightly. He didn't know what was coming, but something in his gut made him lift his gaze. His back straightened. His hands, which had been resting gently atop the gift box, now dropped quietly to his sides. The president continued, his voice now slow, deliberate, solemn. "There are people who never stand in the spotlight. They don't appear in graduation photos, receive medals, or earn titles. But they are the ones who quietly shape this institution and the future of dozens of our students." The audience gradually fell silent. Some parents began paying closer attention. A few students exchanged quick glances. Even Savannah tilted her head slightly, her eyes narrowing, as if sensing that what was coming next was no longer in the script. The president paused, then calmly announced, "Today I have the honor of revealing to the entire university the identity of a very special benefactor. Someone who, for the past 5 years, has quietly supported the Phoenix Legacy Scholarship Program, ensuring that over 30 students from working-class families could graduate debt-free." A ripple of shock moved through the auditorium. Whispers spread like a slow-building wave. Was it Mr. Whitmore? Maybe the Coldor Foundation? Could it be Senator Dunn? But then, the president delivered a final line that dropped like a stone. "And today, he has agreed to step out of the shadows." The stage lights dimmed. A single spotlight narrowed and swept across the crowd, until it landed on the very last row, where a black man, dressed in an old suit, sat quietly. The wooden box still rested on his lap, as if it had been waiting for this moment. For years, only a single spotlight remained, beaming down on the final row, where Walter Jennings sat motionless like a statue. Hundreds of eyes turned back. Some raised eyebrows, some covered their mouths, some squinted in disbelief at what they were seeing. The university president spoke his name, clearly, slowly. "Mr. Walter Jennings, founder of Jennings Engineering, has been the man behind the Phoenix Legacy Scholarship for the past 5 years." The atmosphere suddenly became a vacuum. No applause, no scraping chairs, no phones clicking pictures. Only the sound of fabric shifting as Walter rose to his feet. He stood, calmly, unhurried. His face was unnervingly composed, as if he wasn't walking toward the stage to receive recognition, but simply stepping out of the shadow of a lifelong rejection. The small gift box in his hand gently clenched. And then, he began to walk. In the front row, Savannah froze. Her mouth parted slightly, her hand stalled in mid-air, as if trying to stop something. But it was far too late. Her mother, Elaine, stared wide-eyed, hand to her chest, nearly bursting into tears from the shock. Professor McCarthy, head of the engineering department, stammered as recognition dawned. Jennings Foundation. It can't be. I met him at the donor summit 3 years ago." A wealthy parent whispered, "Wait, he's the one who funded the new biotech lab equipment." An alumnus jumped to his feet. "I got the Phoenix Scholarship. Oh my God." Walter walked step by steady step down the aisle, through a sea of gazes that shifted from indifferent to stunned to ashamed. No music, no announcement, only the weight of his footsteps, landing like hammer blows, cracking through the silence that had lasted 18 long years. And among the crowd, those who once mocked him, who dismissed him as a shadow on the sidelines, Now, not one of them could raise their head. Walter stepped up to the edge of the stage. An assistant rushed over, ready to help him up the steps, but he gently shook his head. He walked up on his own, each step deliberate, steady, not like a man being honored, but like a man reclaiming a presence that had been denied for far too long. President Halberd bowed his head and clasped Walter's hand with both of his. "At last, it's time we thank you publicly, Mr. Jennings." Walter nodded slightly, then turned to face the auditorium. The stage fell into utter stillness. Hundreds of people, from the president, professors, and students to the parents, waited for him to speak. But he didn't say anything right away. Instead, he raised the small wooden box in his hands and gently placed it on the podium. Carefully, deliberately, as though placing the last unspoken piece of his heart, something he had never dared show the world. President Halberd turned to the microphone, his voice solemn and resonant. "Allow me to clarify further. Mr. Walter Jennings is the founder of Jennings Engineering, a mechanical and technology firm now operating in 3 states. Not only is he the sole benefactor of the Phoenix Legacy Scholarship Program, but he also funded the construction of 2 new laboratories on our East Campus and sponsored the renovation of our main library just last year." A quiet murmur began to stir through the auditorium. "And for 5 years, he never once asked to be named. No photos, no plaques, no front row seats. He requested only one thing, that his money reach the students who needed it most." A young woman seated mid-row suddenly broke into tears. She whispered to her friend, "It was him. He's the one who helped me finish college." An elderly professor nodded quietly, eyes misting over. One by one, people began to bow their heads, not out of reverence for his fame, but from the shame of having overlooked, underestimated, or outright dismissed a man, simply because of his skin color and a worn-out suit. And Savannah. She sat frozen, her hands clenched tightly around the edges of her graduation gown. Her chest tightened as if something inside was collapsing. She couldn't even hear what the president was saying anymore. Only one sentence echoed endlessly in her mind. "I don't have a father, and I've never needed one." But that very man, was the one who had paid the price for her to stand on that stage today. She sat there, in the honored guest section, heart pounding, hands ice cold, sweat dampening her back beneath the graduation gown. The name Walter Jennings had just been announced like a bronze plaque, met with a thunderous wave of applause. But to her it sounded like a verdict. And then the memories came flooding back, not in order, not by will. She remembered 9th grade, when she fell seriously ill and no one was around to take her to the hospital. It was Walter who carried her out into the freezing night, snow up to his knees. She remembered 11th grade, when her mom lost her job and they thought they wouldn't be able to pay tuition. But then a mysterious scholarship letter appeared in their mailbox. She never knew who sent it and never asked. She remembered freshman year of college, when her laptop broke. And Walter, who didn't even understand modern tech, quietly went out, sold his cherished watch, and bought her a new one. She had always believed it was a gift from Mom. She remembered the evenings Walter sat mending a broken chair, patching up her old sneakers when her mother was away. The mornings when he shoveled snow from the porch, left food ready on the table, then slipped back into his room. Like he wasn't there at all. Every small, silent moment, never demanding anything in return, now thundered against her chest like a pounding drum. A tear slipped down her cheek. Then another. Savannah raised a hand to wipe it away, trying to hold it in. But she couldn't, because she had stood before the entire auditorium and declared, "I don't have a father." And now, the entire auditorium was on its feet, applauding the very man she had denied. No one condemned her, but the look in their eyes, even her mother's, said one thing clearly. They had recognized him, but she had not. On stage, Walter never turned to look at Savannah. He didn't need to. He wasn't there to prove anything. He was there for one reason, to keep a promise. "Whether I'm invited or not, I'll be there on the day you graduate." And now, he had kept his word. As soon as the ceremony ended, Savannah sprang from her seat as if driven by instinct, saying nothing, waiting for no one. She rushed toward the wings of the stage, where the staff had begun packing up signs and souvenir boxes. She moved quickly, almost running, her eyes scanning every face, searching through a crowd that was now thinning. "Walter? Mr. Jennings? Dad?" No answer. She pushed open a small door leading to the backstage lounge, the room reserved for distinguished guests to rest between segments. It was empty. The wooden chair beside the desk still bore a faint indentation where someone had sat. But now it was cold to the touch. A wall mirror reflected the soft yellow light from the overhead bulb, casting a haze over the room, as if the entire space had become ghost-like, distant. In the center of the table, there was one thing left behind: the wooden box. Savannah froze. Her hands trembled as she stepped closer. The box had been placed with care, perfectly centered, as if Walter had prepared it deliberately, as if he knew she would come. On top of it was a folded note, written in firm but gentle handwriting. "Savannah, if you felt proud today, then I'm happy. And if you felt ashamed of me, then I'm sorry I wasn't worthy of having a place in your memories." Savannah finished reading, then pulled the box tightly to her chest. She sank into the chair, the same one Walter had occupied just minutes before. And at last, the tears broke free. The overhead light flickered faintly, as if bowing to the shaky breath of a daughter who had just lost the most important thing in her life. Not her career, not her accolades, not her title, but the man who had loved her with everything he had, without ever asking to be named. The backstage room now held only her. The wooden box was still clutched in her hands, but Walter had stepped out of her world without a word of blame, without a trace of accusation. Savannah stood abruptly. She reached into her pocket, her hands trembling as she pulled out her phone. She opened her contacts, tapped on a name she hadn't touched in years: W. Jennings. The screen lit up, calling. The sound of the dial tone echoed through the heavy silence. Once, twice, 3 times. And then, "This is Walter. If you're someone I care about, leave a message. I'm still here." Beep dash. Savannah froze. Her mouth opened slightly as if to speak, but her throat closed. There were no words that could hold what she was feeling. No apology strong enough to erase 18 years of silence. One speech of denial and hundreds of moments where she ignored the man who had always stood behind her. She didn't leave a message. She simply pulled the phone away from her ear, her hand tightening around its edges. She leaned against the wall, eyes closed. No more sobbing, just silent, bitter tears that pushed to the corners of her eyes and slipped down, unspoken. A student passing by the hallway outside paused, intending to step in and offer congratulations, but stopped when they saw her, Savannah, face buried in her hand, shoulders trembling quietly. They turned away without a word. In the dim glow of the flickering fluorescent light, only one voice remained echoing in her mind: "I'm still here." But where was here? And more importantly, was there still time to find him again? Evening descended slowly. The last light of day skimmed over the roof of a small repair shop tucked beneath the southern industrial zone of the city. A weathered wooden sign hung above a bent metal gate. "Jennings Auto Repair, established." 2004. Savannah stepped out of a taxi. No stage, no applause. Only the scent of motor oil, the clinking of metal tools, and the distant hum of a passing freight train. She walked slowly inside, still clutching the small wooden box he had left behind. At the back of the garage, Walter Jennings was bent beneath the undercarriage of an old car. His hands blackened with grease, shirt sleeves rolled up, shoulders stained from years of labor. Beside him sat his trusted toolkit, the most constant thing in his life, aside from his quiet love for her. She stood in silence for a few seconds, then spoke, softly, but enough to make him pause. "Dad." Walter froze, not because he heard the word dad, but because it had been so long since he'd been called that. A word so simple, yet to him always just a quiet hope, never a given. He slowly slid out from beneath the car, and turned to face her. Their eyes met. No anger, no reproach, only the gaze of a man, still waiting. Savannah stepped closer. Then, without another word, she placed the wooden box in his hands and bowed her head. "I'm sorry, can you forgive me, Dad?" Walter looked down at the box, then at her. He reached out and gently touched her shoulder, the way he always had when she was small, after she scraped her knee, or when her test scores weren't what she hoped for. "I was never angry with you," he said, voice raspy with age. "I was just afraid that you'd think I was never there." Savannah broke into tears. She threw her arms around him. Grease from his shirt stained her graduation gown. But she didn't care, because for the first time, she embraced him as a daughter. Truly, completely. 1 week later, Westport University campus. It wasn't a grand graduation ceremony, but today a quiet gathering was held at the East Campus, where a new plaque had just been mounted on the wall of a freshly renovated building, Jennings Hall, in honor of legacy, not bloodline. Beneath the building, a small crowd had gathered: students, faculty, alumni, and members of the press. At the center stood a simple wooden podium, microphone already on. Savannah stepped up. She wasn't wearing a graduation gown, just a plain white shirt and dark trousers. Her face was calm, her eyes still red, but her voice, low and steady, carried weight. "I used to believe I didn't need a father, but the truth is, I always had one." The campus lawn fell completely silent. I was just too blind to realize he was always there, in the back row, at the end of every question, outside every frame, but he never walked away. Her voice trembled slightly. She paused, took a deep breath. "He's not just my father. He's the reason I got to study, to live, to understand what it means to be a truly good man." A few students quietly wiped their eyes. That day, I stood on this campus and said, "I don't have a father." But today, I stand here to say the name that should have been spoken first. She lifted her head. Her eyes found him. Walter Jennings, seated near the back of the gathering, still wearing the same old suit. He looked up at her, but this time he wasn't alone. Walter Jennings. "He is my father, not a stepfather, not a stranger. My father, in every way love quietly earns its right to be called by name." Applause broke out, at first from just a few people. Then the entire crowd rose to their feet. No one needed prompting. They stood and clapped. For a man who didn't need to do anything more. Walter bowed his head, but this time, he bowed in honor. After the plaque unveiling, the crowd slowly began to disperse. But a small group of young students lingered beneath the brand-new bronze inscription, Jennings Hall. One of them, a first-year student with a tilted backpack and a notebook in hand, looked up at the gleaming letters in the amber sunset and whispered to his friend, "Who is he? He doesn't look like a businessman or a public figure." A gentle female voice spoke from behind, "He's my father." The group turned around. Savannah stood beside them, smiling, a quiet smile filled with both pride and humility. Not my biological father, not a celebrity, but he did what no one else dared to do. He became a father, without needing to be called one. Silence settled over the students. Then they bowed their heads. In the distance across the quad, Walter Jennings stood alone, gazing up at the building now bearing his name. He didn't step forward. He didn't raise a phone to take a photo. He simply stood there, hands gently clasped in front of him, eyes distant but peaceful. The same old suit hung on his frame, the same worn shoes dusted by the campus soil, but his face was the face of a man who had returned from the margins and finally been given his place. The evening light fell slowly. Sunbeams spilled across the roof of the building, bearing his name. There were no stage lights, no spotlight, no VIP rows or grand speeches. Only an aging black man standing quietly in the middle of the campus, needing no attention. Because for the first time in his life, he was no longer no one. There are some people who never need to be called father, because they've lived as one, quietly, fully, and without asking for anything in return. There are kinds of love that make no noise, but every action, every glance, Every gift left behind is a silent declaration of love. And there are truths that only come into full view after the lights go out. The stage is cleared and the forgotten man finally steps forward. If you've ever known someone like Walter Jennings, someone who sacrificed everything and never once asked to be thanked, share this story so that no one ever has to sit in the back row of life just because they wore an old suit. Tap like if this story moved you and leave a comment. I saw him. If you too once quietly recognized a father like that in your life, thank you for staying with us until the very end. We'll see you in the next journey, where the light will finally reach those who were once left in the dark.